The small town of Maple Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where church bells rang every Sunday morning, and where simple lives carried quiet burdens. For Claire Matthews, those burdens had become heavier over the years. Widowed just after giving birth to her daughter Emma, she had spent the past 6 years raising her alone, working long shifts as a nurse, and sacrificing every comfort for the little girl who became her whole world. Emma. A bright, kind-hearted child with soft brown curls and curious eyes, never knew the depth of her mother's struggle. She saw her mom as strong, always smiling, even when tired. But as kids often do, she noticed the small things, how her mother's eyes stayed sad for just a moment too long when no one was watching, or how she flinched just slightly when someone mentioned Dad in casual conversation. Emma had never had a father figure, no birthday surprises from a dad. No bedtime stories read in a deeper voice, no strong hands to hold both of theirs on walks home from the park. She didn't feel broken, but she knew something was missing. 1. Sunday morning, the air was cooler than usual. The pews of the old wooden church creaked under the weight of the regular congregation. Emma sat beside her mother, legs swinging beneath her dress, her tiny shoes knocking gently against the wood. She had folded her hands carefully, copying the way her mother did every week. But this time, her prayer was her own. She looked up at the tall stained glass window, her eyes tracing the colored shapes of angels and stars. Then she closed them, again scrunching her face as if focusing harder would send her words faster to heaven. With a soft whisper that floated like a feather through the air, she said, "Dear God, please give Mommy a dad. Not for me, I'm okay, but for her. She's lonely, I can tell. Please make her happy again. And maybe someone who likes pancakes." She didn't know her voice had carried beyond the pew. In the very last row of the church, near the exit where few people sat, Daniel Whitmore had heard every word. Daniel wasn't a regular at that church, or any church, for that matter. The last time he had stepped into one was at his mother's funeral 6 months earlier. That day he hadn't come for the sermon or for a community. He come looking for quiet. Daniel was a man who had everything money could buy. The successful founder of a chain of eco-technology companies, he had made millions before turning 35. But success brought isolation. His days were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and silent elevators in luxury buildings. When his mother passed away, the last family he had, the silence around him grew louder than ever. He began driving aimlessly on weekends, ending up in small towns like Maple Creek, wondering if peace lived somewhere he hadn't yet found. That Sunday, when he sat down at the back of the church, it wasn't because of faith. It was because he missed hearing something real. And in that quiet moment, what he heard wasn't the preacher's voice, or the choir singing. It was a little girl's plea to God. Her words hit something deep in him. Daniel wasn't a father. He had no children, no siblings, no wife. But he remembered the nights his own mother sat alone, missing the man she lost young, and how her loneliness was something she never said out loud, but always carried in her eyes. Emma's voice sounded like something pure, too young to know. Cynicism, too loving to ask for something selfish. After the service, Daniel remained seated for a long time while others filed out. He watched Claire from a distance, recognizing the quiet strength in her posture. She didn't notice him, nor did Emma. The little girl held her mother's hand and skipped down the aisle, chatting happily about something from Sunday school. Claire nodded and smiled. Daniel saw the fatigue in her eyes, the kind you can't hide behind a smile. That day, he didn't approach them. But he came back the next Sunday. And the next, each time, he sat in the same back pew, arriving early. Enough to hear the start of the prayers and staying just long enough to see Claire and Emma leave. He never intruded. He didn't even know their names yet. But he began learning their rhythm, how Emma always wore a ribbon in her hair, how Claire brought a worn Bible with a paper flower tucked between the pages. He began learning how Claire looked at her daughter like she was the only light in the world. Over the weeks, Daniel began asking quiet questions to the pastor and the few regulars. He learned that Claire was a single mother, a nurse at the county hospital, known for volunteering at food drives and never missing a Sunday. He found out Emma had been in the children's choir last Christmas and had sung a solo asterisk. Still, Daniel didn't speak to them. He wasn't sure why he hesitated, perhaps out of respect. Perhaps fear of coming across as anything other than what he was, someone deeply moved, not by a romantic impulse, but by a child's love for her mother, asterisk then. On the sixth Sunday, Emma noticed him, asterisk she turned in her pew, saw him seated alone and gave him a small wave. It was innocent, polite, something a child might offer to any stranger. Daniel smiled and returned the gesture. Claire turned to see who Emma was waving at and nodded politely. She didn't recognize him, but she'd seen him in the back row. Enough times to know he was no longer a visitor, asterisk that moment was brief, but it shifted something. The next week, when the service ended, Daniel found the courage to step forward. Asterisk, he approached them just outside the chapel doors, heart pounding in a way he hadn't expected. Asterisk, "Hi," he said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding. I've been coming here a few weeks now, and I just wanted to say, your daughter has a beautiful spirit." Asterisk, Claire smiled, slightly guarded but gracious. "Thank you. This is Emma," asterisk, Emma grinned. "We've seen you in the back. Mommy says you're quiet like the mice in Cinderella." Asterisk, Daniel laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." Asterisk, he knelt slightly to Emma's eye level. "Can I tell you something?" He asked her. She nodded. "I heard your prayer a few weeks ago. It was very brave." Asterisk, Emma's eyes widened. "You did?" Asterisk, Claire's brow furrowed slightly in confusion. "Prayer?" Asterisk, Daniel stood and looked at Claire, his voice steady but vulnerable. "She asked God for something, and it touched me more than I can explain. I don't know what it means yet, but I'd love to get to know you both, maybe over lunch sometime." Asterisk, Claire was stunned. Her instinct was to protect, to question. But there was no charm in Daniel's words, no performance. Just truth, asterisk she looked down at Emma, who whispered, "Mommy." He heard it. That means he was supposed to. And something about that felt right. Daniel didn't expect anything. He hadn't planned a story. He just followed the pull of something genuine, something he hadn't felt in years. And it all began with a little girl's simple prayer, whispered to heaven and heard by a stranger, asterisk. Claire had always believed in keeping herself composed. After all, she was a mother first, and motherhood didn't wait for grief or loneliness to pass before demanding your full attention. Ever since her husband passed away in a car accident, when Emma was just a few months old, Claire's world had become one of quiet sacrifices. She stopped playing the piano. She sold her wedding ring to cover medical bills. She worked night shifts at the hospital, making sure she was home in the mornings just in time to pack Emma's lunch and walk her to school. Claire didn't complain. She didn't let herself cry too much. Her tears came in silent moments after Emma had fallen asleep, in the kitchen, in the bathroom, or when folding laundry and an old photo slipped out from a drawer. Then she would wipe them quickly and move on. Asterisk Emma, 6 years old, saw everything through a lens of innocence. She didn't understand the full weight her mother carried, but she sensed things. She could tell when her mom smiled just to reassure her. She saw how her mother lingered at the couples in the grocery store who joked in the aisles, or how she lowered her gaze when another father picked up their child from school. Emma had once asked why she didn't have a dad, and Claire had answered, honestly but gently, "Your daddy was very brave and loved you more than anything. He just had to go to heaven early." Emma accepted that. She didn't need a perfect life. But in her heart, she wished she could see her mom happy. Really happy. Asterisk Daniel Whitmore had heard her wish. Not because it was directed at him, but because it slipped out of Emma's lips in a church pew one quiet Sunday morning. At that moment, he wasn't a millionaire, a businessman, or a man of status. He was simply a man sitting in the back of a small-town church, grieving the loss of his own mother and wondering what was left for him in a life that had grown too silent. When he heard Emma whisper her prayer asking God not for toys or treats, but for a dad for her mother, he felt something crack inside him. Not pity, not sadness, something else. A deep, unfamiliar stirring. A recognition of sincerity that his world of wealth and boardrooms never gave him. Weeks passed before he introduced himself to Claire and Emma. His approach was gentle, not wanting to seem presumptuous or invasive. He simply asked if he could take them both to lunch. Claire hesitated. She wasn't used to kindness without strings. But Emma, without hesitation, beamed and said yes. That first lunch was simple grilled cheese and tomato soup at a local diner. They talked about books and dogs and school plays. Daniel was charming, but not overly so. He was careful, listening more than speaking. Claire liked that. She noticed how he paid full attention when Emma talked about her art project and how he never tried to dominate the conversation. He didn't ask probing questions about their lives. He just existed with them, quietly and respectfully. Over the next few weeks, they began to meet more often. Sometimes it was coffee after church. Sometimes it was bumping into each other, coincidentally, at the farmer's market. Slowly, Daniel began to show up, not with grand gestures, but with presence. He remembered Claire's favorite tea, helped Emma find books at the library, and once offered to fix the porch light that had been flickering. For months, he never tried to force himself into their lives. He waited until he was invited. Claire appreciated the patience. After years of doing everything alone, having someone simply offer help without expectation felt both strange and comforting. Daniel found himself looking forward to Sunday mornings again. Not for the sermons, but for the moment when Emma would run up to him with a drawing or a new joke. He realized that his mansion, his investments, and all his financial triumphs had never given him the feeling of belonging the way these two people had. There was laughter again, real laughter, not the polite kind from cocktail parties. There was dinner with conversation instead of silence. There were evenings spent helping Emma with school projects and watching Claire smile as if she finally allowed herself to. Claire still struggled. She was wary of trusting too quickly. She had learned not to count on people, especially those who claimed to want to fix her life, but Daniel never tried to fix anything. He just showed up. One evening, when Emma got a bad cold, Daniel brought soup, tucked her in, and read her a bedtime story while Claire finally rested for a moment. The way he held Emma's hand and wiped her forehead, he didn't do it to impress Claire. He did it like it mattered. Like Emma mattered to him. Claire watched this man, wealthy beyond anything she'd ever known, kneeling beside her daughter's bed. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to cry openly, not because she was sad, but because something inside her dared to hope. Daniel saw her tears but didn't speak. He just reached out, held her hand, and let her be. In time, their connection deepened. Daniel met Claire's co-workers at the hospital. He attended Emma's school recital and stood in the back clapping louder than anyone else. He brought flowers, not the expensive kind, but wildflowers Claire had once said reminded her of her childhood home. Every gesture was simple but carried weight. He wasn't performing love. He was building it, one quiet moment at a time. One afternoon, while walking through the town square, Emma tugged on Daniel's coat and asked, "If I called you Dad by mistake, would that be weird?" Daniel knelt, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Not weird at all, it'd be the greatest honor." Claire watched from a few steps behind, her heart full and afraid all at once. Love was risky, trust even more so. But in that moment she felt something stronger than fear. Later. As the sun began to dip and painted the sky with warm hues, Daniel took Claire's hand in his, walked slowly beside her, and said, "I didn't come here looking for anything, but I think I was led here. To you, to Emma, to this moment." Claire didn't reply immediately. She just held his hand tighter. Everything Daniel did came not from a need to fill a void in his life, but from the genuine connection he'd found in them. And everything Claire began to feel wasn't based on desperation or loneliness, but on trust that had been slowly and quietly earned. The millionaire, who had once believed his life would always be filled with silent rooms and quiet dinners, now found joy in the chaos of a 6-year-old's questions and the soft laughter of a woman who was rediscovering happiness. And the little girl who prayed for a dad for her mommy. She never imagined that her whispered words in a quiet church would ripple out and return not just with an answer, but with love that grew from patience, kindness, and presence. Asterisk, would you like the full continuation of the story from here, or a scene-by-scene version for video adaptation?